Hi, good afternoon. Welcome to Office Hours from the Performance Office, a series that we've been putting on for quite some time. This, I think, is our third or fourth year. This one is the first one we're doing one specifically related to accessibility, accommodations, and the alternate assessment system. So welcome, everyone. This session is being recorded. So in the event that you need to turn this around to your colleagues, once we record it and have it captioned, it will be posted to our website at some point soon. We will be handling questions throughout the through the session through the chat box, or excuse me, through the question box. So you can type your questions into there. We will try to attend to them, writing back to you if possible, kind of on the fly. And we also, at the end, the questions that we don't get to, we will ask them verbally. And we also we will be using the raise hand feature too. So if you want to state your question using the microphone, we would love to hear your voices out there in the field. Okay, next slide, please. Okay, so just a little bit about our office. As I mentioned, it's the performance office that at CSDE that puts on our student assessments. I'm joined today, or my name is Abe Christ. I'm a bureau chief in the performance office. I'm joined today by my colleague, Deirdre Ducharme. Deirdre is gonna do pretty much all the presenting today. She's gonna be handling most of the slides. And also, Janet Stuck supports Deirdre in the efforts with special populations. Janet is not here today, but Deirdre will be handling all the slides and many of the questions likely. Also on the call are likely Jeff Craig from our office, who works with science and CTOS, our alternate science test. And then next slide, please. Also from our office, they might or might not be on the call, but just in case you need to contact anybody, listed here, Christy Alberino. Christy manages our appeals, works with our Smarter Balance interim assessments, as well as the Smarter Balance test. Also on the call, thank you, Michelle Rosado. Michelle's working behind the scenes to make sure everything works smoothly with the GoToWebinar. Michelle also is our PM for the Connecticut SAT School Day to make sure that goes off without a hitch every year. And then finally, Marlene Shamaroy. Marlene works as sort of the glue in our office to hold everything together. You probably speak to her when you would call, well, back before March. But then if you email her, this is her email address. Okay, and there are also some of our colleagues, before I turn it over for the agenda to Deirdre, some of our colleagues from Cambium Assessment Inc. are also behind the scenes today. Jen Cho, Amber Benlian, and Marie Musumeci. They're here as well. They might be answering questions potentially in the question box too. So I think I'm all set with the intro here. I'm going to turn it over to Deirdre. As I mentioned, if you have questions throughout the presentation, feel free to use the question box. We'll try to address those as we kind of go through, and then at the end, we'll try to get to most of them. And also, if you want to speak your question, you can state it using the raise hand feature, and we would love to hear your question, and we'll try to answer it then. So, Deirdre?
Thanks, Abe. Hi, everyone. Welcome to our first office hours for spring 2021. And it's great to spend a little time with you today. I know that your schedules are busy, so I want to make sure that our time together is efficient. And given that this is our first office hours for the season, know that Janet and I do have a second office hours scheduled in March, which will again target some of the special population accessibility issues that come up prior to testing. And then we'll have our stand-in meetings running during the testing window, April through June. So as far as today, what I want to do is take some time just to remind you about the hierarchy for testing. And really the focus of today is for in-person testing and making sure that you have everything in place for your students who will participate in the in-person Smarter Balance and NGSS test administration. I want to review some of the designated supports and accommodations, as well as the new embedded speech to text. We've had a few questions about this accommodation, and I just want to provide some clarification on its use and how you can practice this accommodation with your kids. I'll also review the special documented accommodations process and spend the last part of the session covering nuts and bolts for the alternate assessment. And certainly if you have any questions along the way, you can type them in your chat box. At the end of the session, you're welcome to raise your hand and ask any questions that I haven't, addressed in this presentation. Next slide, please. All right, just again, as a reminder, given the expansive test window that we have for science, for Smarter Balance, for the alternate assessment, we're hoping that a majority of our students will be able to participate in testing in person. So as you can tell, based on the hierarchy, our goal is that students will be able to participate in testing this year. However, we know that there are situations where certainly we have students who are fully remote for the remainder of the school year. And we also have students who may be remote kind of in and out of the next few months based on the course of the pandemic or situations within our community dependent on spread and whatnot. So we do have a remote proctoring tool that will be made available to our districts on April 19th. And certainly we will have specific information to support you in preparation for remote testing, and that information will be forthcoming. Next slide, please. As far as preparing your students presently for in-person testing, the expectation is that for your students who are either fully in person or using a hybrid model, that you maximize the benefit of the extended testing window so that students can participate in testing. You have until June 4th to complete testing. So if things look like you need a little bit more time as far as introducing a test schedule this spring, just know that you have some flexibility as far as maybe scheduling testing later in the testing window, so that you can reach more of your students who may be using a hybrid model. We certainly understand the complexities of this, and I am not minimizing the amount of work that goes into planning the assessment for your students. I'm just, from this perspective, we want you to know that we're open and certainly willing to work with you as far as trying out, as making this process as seamless and convenient as possible for you and your students with minimal interruption with instruction. As far as your students who are potentially remote, there is flexibility as far as making arrangements to have students test maybe in an alternate school or district location. So if families don't feel comfortable having students return to school just for the sake of testing, there may be other options that your school district can offer. So this is just one particular strategy. And then finally, the last strategy, as already mentioned, is the remote administration for students who are fully remote. From the perspective of students with accommodations, especially special documented accommodations, we want you to keep the test setting in mind, because there may be situations where students will not be able to use a particular accommodation in a remote test setting. So for example, if you have a student who requires something like a human scribe or a human reader, the provision of an accommodation like that really has to be provided within an in-person test setting. So whether that's in a one-to-one setting in school or at an alternate school or district location. So just keep in mind some of these nuances that go hands in hand with your students as you're preparing for spring testing. Next slide, please. Okay, so as far as a reminder with our alternate assessment, given the complexities with the test design and the fact that our students are really receiving customized one-on-one support with their TEA, students will have to participate in an in-person test environment. So what that means is that we don't offer a remote test option for our students who are fully remote. And also what this means is that if for this particular population, for kids who are unable to come into school and test, then as part of the waiver that we're applying to the United States Department of Ed, we're hoping that that participants will be waived for or districts will be waived for accountability measures. And what that would mean is that our non-testers would simply count as non-participants for this current school year. If for some reason you have a situation where a student who qualifies for an alternate assessment, if a student is receiving supports and services through their IEP in the home environment, if there's a situation where you have a trained staff that's providing these services in the home, there is a chance that the test administrator could potentially administer an alternate assessment to that student in the home. But I think that this particular scenario is rare, and we do not necessarily recommend that this arrangement be made for students who are receiving their instruction remote. But at the same time, we defer to our local districts, and if this is something that can be arranged between the family and the trained teacher and the school district, it is an option. Next slide, please. Okay, we're going to shift now to a quick review on how to prepare your teachers and determine the test settings for your students who are participating in spring testing. And what I mean by that is when you're preparing for testing, you'll want to just review the designated supports that your students are eligible for based on their tied entry, and you'll want to make sure that the students who have accommodations, that you know what accommodations those students are entitled to prior to test day. And you might already have a strategy in your local school or district for identifying these students, but I wanted to take a moment to show you how you can generate a report in TIDE that will give you a list by student of any of the designated supports, whether they're embedded or non-embedded, as well as the accommodations that were submitted in TIDE. So as you can see on your screen, I've pulled up a snapshot of the TIDE system under preparing for testing. What you'll do is you'll select the test settings and tools option, and from that drop-down menu, it will bring you to your school screen. That depends on your user role, but let's say you're a school coordinator, you'll have access to the students within your school. And so what you'll do is you can choose a specific grade. So for instance, grade 3, and then press the search fields under the test settings and tools. And Michelle, if you click on the next screen, you'll see that what I have here is the dashboard that provides all of my students in grade 3 that are in the TIDE system associated with my particular school. What you can do is you can click on the printer icon that appears at the top of the screen, and then from that point, you'll choose all student settings and tools as indicated by the blue arrow. And when you click on that option in the menu, it will bring you to another report that you can print. Next slide, Michelle. This particular report will give you, again, the list of all of your students and their associated supports and accommodations in TIDE. So for instance, what you could do with something like this is you can customize a report, again, by grade. You could even make this unique for particular teacher and present this information so that the teachers know, or the test examiners know in advance what their students need as far as the embedded and non-embedded supports and accommodations. And this particular report is also helpful if you are planning for those remote testers who will be taking the Smarter Balance or Science assessment remotely online. So there will be a little bit more planning you'll have to do for those kiddos as far as making sure that they have any of the non-embedded supports needed at the time of testing. We will provide more detail about this in our subsequent office hours, especially as we support your work in transitioning to the remote proctoring tool. Next slide, please. I'd like to take a moment just to review the designated supports and accommodations associated with text-to-speech and read aloud. We get lots of questions about, when is it considered a designated support? When is it an accommodation? And when is it a special documented accommodation? So when we think about the purpose of text-to-speech, especially in the world where students are accustomed to using this particular feature in many aspects of their technology, text-to-speech is considered a designated support for our students who are accustomed to having an audio read students like test items or certain aspects, maybe like, in an instructional setting, some of the programs that kids are using online. So Smarter Balance and NGSS does have this feature as a designated support in which students can, if they have it activated in Tide, they can have a portion of the test read to them through the voice package system in the test delivery system. So text-to-speech for math and science includes the reading of the stimuli. So any portion of the item that's not necessarily a test question, but it might be the upfront content that's used to introduce a test item, that will be read to the student in addition to the items. This is an embedded designated support that's available for mathematics and science, and it must be activated in Tide. It's available to any student in which an educator determines that there's a need or an appropriateness for this support. It becomes an accommodation, and it's also a designated support for English language arts in the instance that students need to have the test items read to him or her. So again, it's a designated support, it's entered in Tide. It becomes an accommodation when students with specific disabilities, typically students with print or visual disabilities who can't access the print on their computer screen without the audio readback, students can receive the embedded text-to-speech as an accommodation. So again, it's available to students with an IEP or 504 plan in which there's a documented need. As a reminder, what you need to do in this particular instance is complete the decision guidelines for text-to-speech. We've included the hyperlink on this slide. It's a one-pager. It's completed, maintained locally, but within the form, there is a link that you will use to submit the student response, the responses, the characteristics of the students. You'll submit that to our office. And that's an accommodation for having the reading passages read to the student. Next slide. We also know that there are times where, based on the student's disability and needs, that he or she can't access an embedded text-to-speech. So we provide an option for a read aloud. Now, when we go back to the differences between a designated support and an accommodation, we have read aloud options for assigning a teacher, a trained teacher, to read the math or science stimuli items or English language arts items to a student. It's done in a one-on-one setting, and it's an available designated support. You enter that designated support in Tide. If a student needs to have a read aloud of the ELA reading passages, that does require the submission of a special documented accommodation. Michelle, do you mind choosing the next slide, please? Thank you. So for the provision of a human reader for the ELA reading passages, we do require that you submit a special documented accommodation to our office. Again, this is usually an accommodation that's needed for students with print or visual disabilities, and it's the alternative for students who cannot access this accommodation through the embedded text-to-speech. So if you have a student who needs this, please reach out to either me or Janet. We'll work with you in getting a petition so that the accommodation is in place at the time of testing. We do require the submission of the student's IEP and some background information as far as how the student is accessing this particular support in the classroom setting. Finally, we've indicated that for students who need a human signer for any portion of the assessment, including the ELA passages, that also be submitted to us through a special documented accommodation request. So if you have students who need this support, this accommodation, please let us know. Again, in these two situations between the human reader and the human signer, the provision of this accommodation really needs to be done in person. So if you have students who need this but are currently remote, you may want to wait and test students later in the end of towards the end of the testing window in the event that their location has changed so that they can receive this accommodation in person. Next slide, please. Okay. This slide here gives you a visual for the decision guidelines for text-to-speech of the ELA reading passages. And if you see in the directions for this particular form, there's a hyperlink where it says submit electronically, and you can, when you click that link, it will bring you directly to our Qualtrics survey system, in which you can enter the response to these items electronically to us. Next slide. I've included some resources here for the text-to-speech versus read aloud. We have a flow chart that delineates between the two, and we have guidelines that were developed by Smarter Balance that explains the process in serving as a human reader. And there are some formal resources that we will share with you if you have teachers who will be serving as a human reader to their students, a human reader of the ELA reading passages. So just note that we have these resources available, but as far as approving specific accommodations, we will provide you with additional material for your teachers to review before test administration. We do have some additional supports for our English learners. There are options in which students can have the math or science test read to them in Spanish. And if you have any questions about that, please send me an email, let me know. But we do have a English learners brochure posted to the portal that does provide more details about that particular designated support. Next slide, please. We're now going to transition to a different type of embedded accommodation that is available for the first time this year, and that is the embedded speech to text. So the embedded speech to text allows students to use their voice to dictate responses to open-ended items on Smarter Balanced. In the past, we've allowed students to use their voice recognition software. Unfortunately, the process was a little clunky. Oftentimes it involved the student using two devices. Sometimes it involved having the student work with a scribe to then have the student's response inputted or transcribed into the student's secure interface. This year, Cambian has released this embedded speech to text, which essentially eliminates all of the headache and hassles that our students and test administrators had to deal with. So what essentially this looks like, hopefully it mirrors the speech to text that our students are using in the classroom anyway. This is an accommodation, so it is available only to students with a documented IEP or 504. But what it allows is students to use their voice to dictate the open-ended responses on Smarter Balanced. There are very few items in which students would have to use an embedded speech to text, but essentially what it allows students to do is, without using any additional software or setup, the students will be able to use an embedded icon microphone icon that will allow them to dictate their response and make modifications in the student response field if the student needs to make any revisions. This particular icon only appears with those very few items in Smarter Balance that require a written response. So what that means is that you may have a student that really may be approved for this accommodation, but may find that he or she doesn't need to use it on a particular segment, maybe a math segment, because there simply are no open-ended items to respond to. Next slide, please. Okay, so as I mentioned, for whenever there's an open-ended item within the Smarter Balanced assessments, whether it's a math or English language arts assessment, there will be a microphone icon that appears below the text box in which the student would type in his or her response. When they activate that icon, it will allow them to dictate their response. And again, the student's response is then, for the most part, accurately transcribed into the text box. Students have about 5 minutes to be able to dictate a response at a given time, and they can go back and modify their dictated response as many times as needed until the student is satisfied with the final response. Next slide, please. This is an example of what a student would see if there is an item in which the text-to-speech accommodation is available. So, for example, you can tell by what you see on the screen, there's this section of text in which the student would potentially type in his or her response, but what they would do is click on the icon at the bottom of the screen, and that would activate their voice recognition. Next slide. So we recommend that students have an opportunity to try this embedded speech-to-text before they begin their spring test administration. So what we recommend is that you provide kids with an opportunity to access a math performance practice test, but to specifically choose the math performance task. And the other consideration is that you want to make sure that the student's accommodation for speech-to-text is entered in the TIDE system. So really, that's the first thing that needs to happen. Make sure that speech-to-text is activated in TIDE, then give your student an opportunity to try out the math performance practice test. The student will log into that practice test, not as a guest, but with his or her first name and student SACID. That will give the student direct link to TIDE to activate speech-to-text. And then within the math performance task, there will be at least a minimum of one item in which the student can use to practice this accommodation. If your student needs additional practice opportunities, the next best strategy we can offer is to administer a brief write interim assessment block. That's also available through the test administration interface, but it would give kids an opportunity to practice their voice recognition for English language arts using items that are specifically developed to measure a written response. So kids can use the brief write IAB as a backup. Just for some consideration, if you do administer an IAB and don't want to keep that particular block, if you will, or that test to count towards the student's performance on an interim, then after your student has an opportunity to practice, then have your test administrator submit an appeal in TIDE to reset the block. So essentially the score that might be generated with a brief write is canceled out, and that practice opportunity does not count towards anything. So that's just one consideration if you're going to use an IAB for the purposes of testing the speech-to-text. And then as a final reminder, kids using this particular accommodation test should test in one-on-one setting. And one of the perks to this program is that it does auto punctuate, capitalize, things like that within the system. And it's okay considering for the open-ended items that kids are responding to, we're not measuring students' grammar usage, punctuation, things like that. So students aren't necessarily having an added benefit, but it is something that does make something like this speech to text a more seamless and user-friendly experience for our students. Next slide, please. Okay. Just a quick reminder about special documented accommodations. If you have students who need to have a specialized accommodation that can't be met through the test delivery interface, something like a human signer of the assessment or the provision of math manipulatives, perhaps even the use of a non-embedded calculator for math in grades 6 through 8, or a customized accommodation that hasn't been captured through our assessment guideline manual, then please reach out to us for a special documented petition. We did have the deadline close earlier this month, but certainly we know that things may come up unexpectedly, or if it turns out that your students need to be supported other than what was currently identified through their PPT, then again, reach out to our office, let us know, and we'll work with you to make sure that we have the proper documentation to review for consideration. We do have more information about this in the assessment guidelines. There's a hyperlink in the PowerPoint, so you're welcome to check out the assessment guidelines for more information. Next slide. And finally, as far as all of our testers, whether they're receiving accommodations, designated supports, or just using universal tools, provide your kids with an opportunity to try out one of the practice tests before they begin the test administration in the spring. And really the benefit is that it gives kids a flavor for the online test platform. They can familiarize themselves with the various tools to be able to navigate and get a flavor for the different type of items there are. The practice test is not scored, so you're not going to receive any data on student performance. It's really just to benefit students and give them some ease and confidence so that they're familiar with, again, the Smarter Balance and NGSS assessments. And we've included a slide with a variety of resources that you can access related to the various student materials, whether, next slide please, whether students will be using the periodic tables or maybe the translated test directions, etc. So we've included a variety of resources on this slide, as well as access to the student assessment newsletter and whatnot. So this is a good resource page so that you can share with staff and have access to a lot of the content that we've covered today. Next slide. We're going to shift now to our alternate assessment system. And this is specifically designed for students with significant cognitive disabilities. Usually it's a much smaller percent of our population of students who will participate in alternate assessments. But we do have alternate assessments for our students in grades 3 through 8 and 11 who will take the math and English language arts test. And then we have an alternate science for our students who are enrolled in grades 5, 8, and 11. As a review, we have some specific deadlines that your teachers will follow as far as when to administer the alternate assessments, and then how to complete some of the steps that will support their work in test administration. So for example, we have a Connecticut alternate assessment eligibility form that your teachers will submit through the data entry interface. And this essentially registers your students for an alternate assessment. We had a deadline of February 15th, but we know that PPTs take place over the course of the year. So if you have any new students who are identified as being eligible for the alternate assessment. Make sure that your teachers enter those eligibility forms through the data entry interface. It does require a follow-up with the help desk to make sure that the student's alternate flag indicator is activated and tied. That's what gives the students access to an alternate assessment. But despite the fact that we have this deadline, we are accepting any new eligibility submissions through the end of this school year. The testing window for the alternate assessment is parallel with Smarter Balanced, and the next generation science assessments for students in grades 3 through 8. So the window for the alternate assessment opens March 29th. It ends on June 4th, and the assessment is delivered online, and it's delivered through the test delivery interface. Students will use their Chromebooks or their testing device to access the online assessment, but because it's an alternate assessment, there's a lot of flexibility as far as how the teacher supports the student, and many times our students are actually using the paper test materials, and then the teacher is transcribing the responses into the secure interface. For your students who participate in the alternate science in grades 5, 8, and 11, your teachers will enter the score responses for science using the data entry interface, and that window opens March 29th, and again, they have until June 4th to submit those responses. We need the students' score responses for CTAS entered within this window, because that's essentially what we use to score the students' performance on the alternate science. And your teachers have access to these materials either online if they need to download and print them, or customize them for students who might need to have the test administered using a smartboard or some assistive technology. And our district test coordinators also have hard copy materials for the alternate science, but if it turns out that you can't locate them or you need support in accessing this material, please reach out to our office and we'll help you out. Next slide, please. We are receiving a lot of questions from our teachers as to why they can't access the eligibility form through the data entry interface. And usually the rationale is that the teacher either does not have a TEA user role identified and tied, or the teacher hasn't completed training. So I wanted to include this slide just as a reminder that if you have a teacher who's expected to administer an alternate assessment this year, check the tied account to make sure that the teacher has the TEA role, and also check your teacher's trained status. We do require annual online testing and training for our staff, and upon completing the training, the system will automatically activate their trained status and tied, and that trained status will give them access to the eligibility form in the data entry interface. It gives them access to a variety of other resources that they'll need to be able to administer an alternate assessment. So if you have any questions about nuancey things with your teachers who are gearing up for the alternate assessments, please reach out to our office. And on the screen, we do have a variety of resources that will help you as a district administrator, or you can share with your staff if they're preparing their teachers for this administration. Next slide, please. What this particular slide shows you is how you can verify whether the teacher has trained status. One question that has come up from our school coordinators is why can't they see who their TEAs are? So currently the way the TIED system is that our district administrators and district coordinators have access to their trained teachers who are administering the alternate assessment. So if there's any question about who those teachers are, you'll have to reach out to the DA. But essentially, when the DA or district coordinator does a search on the teacher, there is a field that appears with the teacher's contact information, indicating whether they're trained or not. So if you see alternate under the trained field, then you know that your teacher's completed the trained requirements. If you find that your teacher has a user role of TA or TE, then that would be another explanation as to why your teacher is not able to access the data entry interface. You want to make sure that he or she has the TEA user role. Next slide, please. The data entry interface is used for a variety of purposes. I've already mentioned that your teachers will use the DEI to submit their eligibility forms. We also use the data entry interface for any of your students who may be taking Smarter Balance or NGSS using Braille test booklets or large print test materials. So just keep in mind that the DEI does serve a variety of purposes, but for those students who are using large print or Braille, upon completion of their test, their teacher will submit their responses through the data entry interface for scoring. Next slide, please. Okay. We've included some commonly asked questions about the DEI. The first question is, when I log into the DEI, I get a message that there aren't any available tests. What does this mean? So this typically applies to our students who are who need an eligibility form submitted through the data entry interface. So if you have a teacher who experiences this particular situation, again, it could be because the teacher doesn't have the right username or user status or hasn't completed training. So I would go back to your TIDE system, look up the teacher and make sure that the teacher has the TEA user role and that the teacher is indicated as trained. Otherwise, the teacher will have to complete the training, or you as a district administrator will need to modify their role. What do I do? How do I revise an eligibility form if it was already submitted? So if you need to make any changes to an eligibility form that was submitted, or if your student's no longer eligible, then what you do as a district administrator is you submit an appeal in TIDE to have the test either reset. Most likely that's what it is. You're resetting the test, and then your teacher can go back and modify. And if it turns out that the student isn't eligible for an alternate, then we can essentially invalidate the test so that the student can take the standard assessments. And if you have a teacher who is submitting an eligibility form, well into the spring, just make sure that you contact the Connecticut Help Desk and let them know that the form was just submitted and ask to have the alt flag indicator activated for that student. And if you need guidance in that process, please reach out to our office. Next slide, please. Okay, this is a snippet for what we're actually talking about with the alt flag indicator. So in the student's TIDE account, in the right-hand column, at the bottom, you'll see this alt indicator field where I have the blue arrow pointing towards it. But I just wanted to remind you that this is something that gets manually activated up until February 15th when the deadline closes. So Cambien will go ahead and manually activate this alt flag indicator for any of the eligibility forms that are submitted. So like I said, when forms get submitted after yesterday's deadline, someone will have to manually go in and activate this. And we won't know that it needs to be activated unless you let our testing company know. Next slide, please. Okay, so similar to Smarter Balance and NGSS, we have a variety of resources that are specific to the alternate assessment. So specifically, we have FAQs on the eligibility process. We have flowcharts. There is an FAQ on the alternate assessment in general. So if you have a new student that's, again, new to your district, maybe a third grader, and you're not quite sure about what that eligibility process is, just note that we do have a variety of resources posted to the portal. These are typically our go-to resources. Next slide, please. And again, we have material that's specific to supporting your teachers who are administering the alternate. So we have checklists specific to the alternate for math and ELA. We have checklists specific for CTAS. We have system user guides. We've also included the test administration manuals here. So feel free to share these resources with your teachers. And finally, we have another office hours scheduled for March 15th from 3:30 to 4:30, again with a focus on accommodations. And then on April 1st and every subsequent Thursday during the testing window, we will entertain questions that you have and address anything that's related to smarter balance, science, the alternate, etc. Just note that on April 8th, we have a solely dedicated session to the remote proctoring tool. We will be releasing additional resources, manuals, PowerPoint trainings, things like that to help support your plan-in work for the remote testing. So stay tuned and make sure that you put April 8th on your calendar so that you can participate in this very new remote proctoring tool that we'll have available for our students. And we've included the registration link at the bottom of this slide. It's also included in the student assessment newsletter. I always recommend that you check out our kind of bi-weekly publications of the SON because there's lots of good information in there, including information about professional development and the Connecticut SAT school day, etc. So please share that resource with your colleagues. Now, I think we'd like to answer any questions that you have. So Abe, I'm gonna pass it on to you.
Hi, Dee, thanks. Thank you for covering all that information. There's a lot there. Yeah, so we've been taking questions in the question box as they've been coming in. I think we've answered every one. The only one, so you can raise your hand, and as I stated earlier, and Deirdre stated, you can raise your hand and ask the question via the audio feature, or write your question into the question box. I think we've answered every single one that has come in and broadcast it to the group, so you should have an answer to all of them. So the only one that I will mention, because we said that we would talk about it, Dee, is more related to technical things, so you're off the hook for the moment, and it relates to the use of Chrome and version 86. And the concern that any higher versions aren't being approved. And the good news is, and this is a straight short answer, that actually at beginning next week we will be releasing information that it is now okay to use up to Chrome 88. So you are okay to use that version. I think that was a concern, a legitimate concern. Now it's not. The answer is now not, well, you should be okay, it's you will be okay. Jen, do you want to, or anybody else want to chime in on that, or is that, I'll assume that's okay. So I don't see any other questions coming in. I got to thank you. We'll take the thank you. Dee, got to thank you. But no other questions. We will we'll give it a minute or so here and sit tight and see if anything comes in, and we'll just wait. Please type them in, or like I said, raise your hand and we will take them via audio. Okay, seeing no more questions, and I don't think I see any raised hands, I want to thank Deirdre, the CAI team, Michelle, thank you so much. And Dee, since you are running the show here and did a great job, you can have the last word. I'm going to kick it back to you.
Great, thanks, Abe. Again, I know how busy everyone is, and so I appreciate the fact that you took time out of your schedule to participate in this presentation. And I just want to remind you that we are here to work with you, answer any questions you have. So please don't hesitate to give me a call or send me an email. This really is truly a partnership, and we know that we appreciate the hard work that you're doing on behalf of your students this year. You always, are so committed, but we also appreciate the sensitivity with what you're going through, what your students are going through this year. So just know we're here to support you, and we look forward to meeting you again next month at our next office hours. Thank you.
Thank you.